Okay, so this is a presentation on Austria-Hungary. So we're going to start off with just a map of the country and what it looked like in 1910, right before World War One. And like the main thing you want to take away from this map is that it's very distinctly ethnically diverse. You can see that there's over like 10 distinct ethnic groups and they're all very interconnected. They're all very interwoven, and this diversity within the empire is going to come into play a lot later in the narrative.
Okay, so the Hungarian Revolution of 1848. So in 1848, there was a major revolution in Hungary, and this was before it joined with Austria to form the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And that empire shared a lot of similarities with other revolutions in Poland, Italy, Portugal, and Switzerland. And the common thread within all these revolutions was that there was oppressed and under underrepresented majority of peasants being controlled by a minority of the upper class, which can be compared to what we studied with Russia and the Tsars and serfs. So the revolution in Hungary was particularly volatile and primarily because of this incredibly diverse population and their goals. And Hungary broke away from Austria in 1848 to form its own state. However, Austria invaded and asserted its control again with the help of Russia. And two major results of the conflict, the monarch Francis Joseph became much more controlling, and the decline in relations with Russia became because Russia refused to pay back war loans, and that will be important later on.
Financial troubles and more losses. Following this brief conflict, the Austro-Hungarian Empire began to decline even further, especially economically. A brief conflict with France in 1859 saw the empire's economy greatly destabilized. Banks were refusing to lend money, which forced reform in the empire. The 1861 reforms resulted in major changes. An imperial council would be formed to control internal conflicts like the money issue, but the emperor would still be in charge of foreign affairs. However, while these might seem significantly beneficial changes, they were ultimately not effective enough. Neither the general population nor the emperor were pleased, because one thought they had not gained enough power, and the other thought he had lost too much. Thus, tensions only increased between both groups. This, coupled with poor decision making on behalf of the emperor as he decided to join the 1866 Austro-Prussian Wars, destabilizing his country even further, he also refused to join the 1850 Crimean Wars, which angered Russia very much and which will also be important soon.
So next we're going to be talking about Austerlitz. So basically all the dissatisfaction and the lack of representation also extended ethnical boundaries. The Hungarians and many other groups still felt they had a lack of control. This feeling was responsible for the 1867 Ausgleich, which established the government that Austria and Hungary would carry into World War One. The best example to compare this would be modern day UK, which are essentially two separate countries, like Austria and Hungary, with the same foreign policy, military, and ruler. This picture is like a good way of simplifying it. Also, Austria and Hungary were naturally dependent and held together by an emperor. The dual system would be led by Franz Joseph, who's an Austrian, which allowed him to act more powerfully, but it's not yet an absolute monarch. The Ausgleich was ineffective in many ways. It didn't follow or didn't allow for better communication between two groups because the emperor was so diverse. It left like thousands of people, such as the Slovaks and the Ukrainians, without major say in the government. Also, many thought that it granted too much power to Hungary because they could refuse to obey Franz Joseph's orders, thus greatly limiting the ability of the empire to act internationally. However, today we would properly view this as acceptable and correct.
All right, so now we're going to talk about some brief social reforms. So, following the long period of uncertainty in the empire, there were some few minor positive reforms in the late 1800s, mostly from Edward Taaffe. Literate men over 24 could now vote, which made the empire more modern, democratic. And there were some socialist movements, but these were quickly put down and repressed. And then in 1895, he was replaced by Casimir Baranin, who was less noteworthy.
And this leads to improving economy. Another way that Austria-Hungary was improving was through its economy. The revolutions in the 1800s have effectively gotten rid of feudalism, and it was well on its way to becoming a blistering economy. The telltale signs of improvement were clearly seen: establishment of the national bank, more railways, and more industry. In fact, it was the second fastest growing economy in Europe behind Germany. As you can see in the graph, Austria-Hungary is in the middle, doing quite well for itself. While it had some struggles in the past, things were overall improving.
And then these are the days before World War One. At this time, Austria-Hungary had perhaps the biggest influence in the beginning of World War One. The emperor infamously sent Franz Ferdinand to Bosnia for a diplomatic mission in 1914, only for him to be assassinated by the Serbian Gavrilo Princip. And then, in turn, this sparked large amounts of nationalism in Austria and Hungary, who declared war on Serbia. Soon after, Russia then declared war on Austria-Hungary due to what we mentioned before, how relations between the two countries have been declining significantly, both from Austria-Hungary refusing to pay loans and refusing to participate in wars on behalf of Russia. And coming from this, over time, World War One would completely destroy Austria-Hungary, and it would end up dissolving at the end. And then here we're excited.